The city had gone asleep, but Daniel couldn't. Every shadow felt like a shape, every passing car a threat. The trunk had revealed too much, exposed too many secrets. Whoever had left it there hadn't done it for luck or charity. It was a test, and now, Daniel was the only one who could see the rules. He ducked into a narrow alley, pressing himself against the damp brick, his heart hammering with the rhythm of a warning drum. Behind him, faint footsteps echoed, bouncing off the walls. Not random, deliberate. Someone had noticed him. Someone had followed the veteran who had once believed he was invisible to the world. The contents of the trunk replayed in his mind. Photographs of missing people, scraps of correspondence implicating figures of authority, a tape recording detailing a plan of abductions and cover-ups. Each item was a piece of a puzzle so large and dangerous it could topple lives. And now, the very people who had created the puzzle were coming after him. Daniel's instincts, sharpened not just by years on the streets, but by the discipline of his time in service, kicked in. He moved fast, slipping from alley to alley, using the city's dark corners as shields. The footsteps behind him faltered once, then resumed. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Every second counted, every hesitation a chance for discovery. He ducked into an abandoned subway entrance, the stale air heavy with decades of neglect. The faint smell of mildew and rust clung to the walls, and the echoes of distant trains reminded him that time in this labyrinth of tunnels was measured not in minutes, but in choices. A wrong turn, and he could be trapped. He clutched the trunk tighter, knowing it contained a force far beyond his understanding. Secrets that powerful people wanted buried forever. As he descended the steps, a single thought consumed him. He couldn't let this get away. Not the truth, not the evidence, not the people whose fates had been erased from the city's memory. Every photograph in the trunk was a life. Every name on a scrap of paper, a soul screaming to be acknowledged. And every second he ran brought him closer to exposure and to danger. From the shadows, a figure appeared at the top of the stairwell. Tall, imposing, silent. A whisper of movement, and Daniel's pulse spiked. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to retrieve what had been taken. Every step he had made, every alley he had traversed, had led to this. The moment when the hunter became aware that he might be the hunted. Daniel pivoted, disappearing into a maintenance corridor, the trunk banging against the walls as he ran. Metal pipes, broken signage, and discarded crates became his armor and his camouflage. He could hear the figure behind him, deliberate and unyielding. It was more than a pursuit. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and willpower. Failure wasn't an option. And then, at the far end of the corridor, he saw it. A faint light flickering, the glow of a doorway to the street above. A chance, a risk. Daniel sprinted toward it, knowing that stepping into the open could either mean freedom or immediate confrontation. The footsteps behind him grew louder, faster, a shadow closing in, an inevitability he couldn't outrun forever. He reached the doorway, the city lights spilling down like judgment, illuminating the rain-slick pavement below. And then a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing at the trunk, tipping it sideways. Papers, photographs, and the tape skidded across the wet concrete, the evidence scattering in a chaotic mess. Daniel stumbled back, heart in his throat, trapped between the figure and the street. And just as he braced for the inevitable, the figure paused, not advancing, not retreating. Something had changed, a hesitation that wasn't there before. Daniel's eyes met the shadowed face for only a fraction of a second, enough to notice a detail that froze him colder than the rain dripping off his hair. A familiar emblem, a symbol that tied this stranger to something far larger, something he thought had been buried long ago. And then, the first words were spoken, cutting through the drizzle. You weren't supposed to see this yet. The rain fell harder now, hammering against the pavement and bouncing off the brick walls of the narrow street. Daniel's chest heaved, his mind racing faster than his legs could carry him. The stranger's words echoed. You weren't supposed to see this yet. They weren't a threat. Not exactly. They were a warning, a statement of ownership, of control. over the secrets he had just uncovered. Daniel straightened, gripping the trunk tighter, his knuckles white through the soaked leather. He didn't know who this figure was, only that they weren't ordinary. The emblem on their coat, half obscured by shadow, suggested affiliation with something official, something that could bury people without leaving a trace. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but every instinct born from his military training reminded him to assess first, act second. The stranger stepped closer, the flickering streetlight revealing a pale, unreadable face. "You shouldn't have touched that," the voice said again, low, controlled. "Do you have any idea what's inside? Do you understand what you're holding?" Daniel swallowed hard. I know enough to see someone's been hiding it. For years. Maybe decades." His voice cracked slightly, but he forced it steady. The trunk had revealed lives stolen from the world, evidence of manipulation, abduction, and silence. He couldn't let it disappear again. The figure paused, tilting their heads slightly. Then, deliberately, they reached toward the scattered photographs and tape, moving slowly, almost ritualistically. Daniel instinctively stepped in front, blocking access. "No, it stays with me," he said firmly. "This isn't yours to take. These people, they deserve to be remembered." For a tense moment, nothing happened. The stranger's eyes scanned the scattered contents, lingering on a particular photograph, a young girl holding a stuffed rabbit, her gaze hollow even in the frozen image. Something shifted in their posture, almost like recognition. And then they spoke, softer now, almost a whisper. "You're too late for some of them. But for the rest?" Daniel's pulse quickened. "The rest?" he asked, feeling the weight of their implication. "Yes, the rest." The stranger's hand hovered over the photograph, then slowly withdrew. "You've opened something bigger than you know. Bigger than either of us. This isn't just a trunk. It's a map. A ledger. A ledger of the people who were removed. And some names are still alive, still hidden in plain sight." Daniel felt a chill creep down his spine. Alive. Hidden. That meant the operation wasn't finished. That meant the people responsible were still watching, still manipulating, still capable of action. He glanced around the deserted street. Every alley, every shadow seemed suddenly alive with possibility. "You don't understand what's coming," the stranger continued, stepping closer, voice clipped but urgent. "Those who left this for you, they're not done. And now, because you've seen it, because you've touched it, they will act. You're part of this story whether you like it or not." Daniel's mind raced. Every plan, every memory of street survival, of military drills, of living unnoticed as a veteran, collided with the new reality. He was now a target, and the trunk, with its secrets, its proofs, its lives frozen in photographs, was the key. The stranger paused, eyes locked on Daniel's. "Decide," they said, voice dropping into a quiet menace. "Do you continue? Or do you disappear like everyone else who has come this close?" Daniel swallowed again, heart hammering, the rain turning the asphalt slick beneath his boots. And in that heartbeat, he realized there was no turning back, because he couldn't unsee what he had found. And the city, the lives behind those photographs, were counting on him to act. Then the stranger stepped back, fading into the darkness of the street, leaving Daniel alone, and more aware than ever that the real danger was only just beginning. The night pressed in around Daniel, wet and oppressive, a city breathing with secrets he had only begun to understand. Every footstep echoed. Every car passing in the distance felt like a countdown. He kept the trunk close, its weight a reminder of what he carried. Lives, evidence, history he had no right to touch yet couldn't abandon. He ducked into a narrow alley, brick walls slick with rain, and allowed himself a single glance over his shoulder. Nothing. No stranger, no shadow, no flicker of movement beyond the mist. But the gut-tightening knowledge that he was being watched, always watched, refused to let him breathe. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was a hunt, and he was the prey. Every instinct he had honed during his years in service kicked in. He moved deliberately, silently, memorizing the turns and junctions he'd passed hundreds of times in a city he'd walked without thought. Now, every corner could hide eyes, every doorway a threat. His mind reeled through possibilities. The stranger wasn't working alone. The trunk wasn't just evidence. It was bait, a lure meant to pull him into something much larger than he had imagined. Daniel's thoughts returned repeatedly to the faces in the photographs, the lives frozen in time. He could not ignore them. There was urgency in their silence, a cry for someone to uncover the truth and expose the network that had held them captive in shadow. Somewhere in this city, people knew. People had orchestrated decades of disappearances and had ensured the records, the papers, and even memories were buried. But that had just changed. A sudden sound shattered the quiet. The metallic screech of a chain dragging across asphalt. Daniel ducked instinctively, heart-pounding, listening. The alley remained empty. Then a shadow detached itself from the mist at the far end. Movement precise, deliberate. The stranger. Daniel froze. The weight of the trunk pressed against his chest, both a shield and a tether. "You shouldn't have run," the figure said, voice carrying over the rain, calm and chilling. "You've seen what was meant to remain hidden. Now you've invited the consequences." He realized then the scope of what he faced. This was no longer about uncovering a secret. It was about survival, and survival meant understanding the network that had created it. Each disappearance, each silent victim, each carefully maintained record was part of a pattern. And the stranger, they were not the threat. They were a gatekeeper, a messenger of the people who remained in power, controlling the invisible strings. Daniel's mind raced. He needed a plan, a way to turn what had been designed as a trap into leverage. But leverage required information, and information required taking risks, moving deeper into the heart of the web he had inadvertently disturbed. The thought of those missing, their families, and the years of stolen lives steeled him. Hesitation could cost more than just himself. As he pressed forward, he caught movement from another direction, a second shadow slipping between streetlights. The city itself seemed to conspire, every puddle reflecting his own paranoia, every echo amplifying his fear. He had entered the lair of people who had thrived in darkness for decades, and they were closing the net. Daniel paused at a corner, the distant hum of traffic masking the quiet footfalls behind him. The rain poured harder, and he realized the city's chaos was his only shield. Every alley, every building, every derelict stairwell was both a danger and a potential escape. But even as he moved, he understood the cold truth. He could never go back. He had stepped onto a path that led to the heart of the operation, and there was no turning aside. And then, at the far end of the street, illuminated by the harsh glow of a single lamp, he saw it, an open door, the symbol of what he had been chasing all along. Not just evidence, not just secrets, but answers. What lay beyond would define not only the rest of his night, but the rest of his life. Every instinct screamed caution. Every heartbeat urged forward. The trap was set, the hunters were patient, and Daniel's choices had only just begun. Daniel's hand trembled as he approached the open doorway, the faint hum of electricity from the streetlights above mixing with the pounding of his own heart. Beyond the threshold lay a room shrouded in shadow, its corners swallowing shapes whole, the scent of damp and old paper thick in the air. He set the trunk down gently, the lock clicking faintly against the concrete floor, and took a cautious step forward. Inside, the truth began to emerge in fragments. Photographs, documents, and artifacts, relics of lives that had vanished without notice, were spread meticulously across tables and shelves. Every image told the same story. Missing persons, unresolved cases, and connections no one outside this room could see. And at the center, carefully arranged, was a series of tapes. Tapes that recorded confessions, movements, and in some cases, the final moments of the lost. Daniel's stomach churned. He realized this was not just evidence of random disappearances. This was a ledger, a map of a network that had operated in the shadows for decades. The missing, the forgotten, the overlooked, all cataloged, all monitored. And now, in his hands, a chance to expose it. He knelt beside the trunk, lifting the first tape with reverence and horror. The label read in neat, looping handwriting, Subject 27, witnessed by Agent R. He felt a chill run down his spine. Agent R. The name belonged to someone he had known long ago, someone trusted, someone who had vanished years before any of this had reached the public. And here, in this room, the evidence of their involvement, or perhaps their victimhood, sat waiting to be understood. The hum of the city outside fell away as he slipped the tape into a dusty player, the click of the mechanism echoing like a gunshot in the empty room. The screen flickered, the grainy image of a man appearing. His eyes scanned the room, a silent accusation, a warning. And then, the voice, low, controlled, yet trembling with fear or anger, began to narrate events Daniel had only glimpsed before, connecting the disappearances in ways he could never have predicted. The implications were staggering. The network was more than a series of unconnected abductions. It was organized, systematic, and horrifyingly efficient. The evidence suggested influence at every level: law enforcement, private institutions, even media outlets complicit in the silence. And a stranger who had lured Daniel here? They were a messenger, a caretaker, a warning that some of what he now held could destroy more than careers. It could topple reputations, ignite scandals, and leave lives in ruin. Daniel backed away, realizing the trunk was no longer just a container of secrets. It was a key, a weapon, and a responsibility. He felt the weight of it settle into his chest, a physical reminder that this journey could not be reversed. Every choice he made from this point forward would ripple outward, touching lives he might never know, and confronting powers far beyond his own. And yet, in the midst of fear, a sliver of resolve emerged. The lives lost, the stories silenced, demanded justice. They demanded that someone, anyone, uncover the truth and ensure that the vanishing, the lies, and the shadows that had cloaked these crimes for years finally faced daylight. Daniel turned to leave, trunk in hand, only to find the stranger had moved. No longer just a shadow at the edge of the room. They were close now, their presence a quiet, undeniable force. "You understand what this means, don't you?" the stranger said, their voice barely above a whisper, yet it resonated with authority and menace. "Once you step out of this room, there's no undoing what you carry." As Daniel nodded, understanding the stakes, the gravity of what awaited him outside became clear. The city beyond this doorway, the same streets, alleys, and corners he had navigated in fear, would no longer be safe. Not for him. Not for anyone who had touched the edges of this secret. The revelation had been made. The consequences were unavoidable. And with the first step out into the rain-slick streets, Daniel's life, and the lives of those connected to the network, would never be the same. The rain had picked up when Daniel stepped into the alleyway, the streetlights casting long, wavering reflections across puddles that mirrored the chaos in his mind. Each footstep on the wet cobblestones sounded impossibly loud, a percussion of dread that echoed the weight of what he now carried. The trunk, heavy and ominous, swung slightly in his hands, its contents a repository of secrets no one was meant to uncover. Ahead, the stranger waited. No longer a shadow, they were fully visible, yet their face remained partially obscured by a hood, features indistinct but presence undeniably commanding. Daniel's pulse thrummed like a drumbeat, matching the steady rhythm of the falling rain. "You brought it," the stranger said, voice calm but edged with steel. "You brought it, knowing that everything you know, everything you've discovered, changes nothing unless you decide it does." Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. "What do you want from me?" he asked, not sure he was ready to hear the answer. The stranger stepped closer, their movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. "I want you to understand. What you hold is not just evidence. It's leverage. It's history rewritten. And it's dangerous. The people behind this, they will not stop. They've operated in silence for decades, shielding their crimes, erasing their tracks. You exposing them means everything changes. Forever." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the enormity of the situation. The photographs, the tapes, the journals. each one a thread connecting a network of disappearances and corruption. He had thought he was stepping into a story, but he had stumbled into a web, one spun so tightly that even the smallest motion could send the entire structure collapsing. The stranger reached out, gesturing to the trunk. Do you understand what must happen next? This isn't about revenge or fame or justice in the traditional sense. This is about telling the story correctly, in full, without being silenced. And it will not be easy. People will try to stop you. They will threaten, lie, and manipulate. But you can't falter. You can't hesitate. Daniel's hands tightened around the trunk. The rain soaked through his coat, but he felt a strange clarity, an unshakable determination settling in his chest. I'll do it, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried with it a weight that seemed to make the stranger pause. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the patter of rain and the distant hum of the city that remained oblivious to the magnitude of what had been unearthed. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows. Another person, unseen until now, moving with the same deliberate calm as the first stranger. Daniel's heart leapt. Was this an ally or another threat? The rain masked their approach, but the way they stopped beside the first stranger suggested something he hadn't anticipated: coordination. You're running out of time, the first stranger said, voice firmer now, tinged with urgency. They know someone has the trunk. They know someone has seen it all. Every moment you delay, every second you hesitate, they gain the advantage. If you're going to tell the story, you must act now. Daniel nodded again. He glanced down at the trunk, at the tapes, photographs, and documents within, the faces of the missing staring back at him from each image. They were silent witnesses, waiting for someone to give voice to their absence. And in that moment, he realized the responsibility was not just his own. It belonged to every lost life, every family, every truth buried by time and fear. The stranger stepped aside, leaving the path clear. Daniel took a deep breath, lifting the trunk higher, feeling its weight as both burden and purpose. With each step toward the city streets beyond, he moved not just through alleys and rain, but through the invisible lines connecting secrets, crimes, and the faint hope that the truth could finally emerge. And somewhere, in the shadows, eyes followed, waiting, watching, calculating. The story was far from over, but Daniel had taken the first irreversible step toward uncovering it all. Daniel walked out of the alleyway into the dim glow of the city, the rain washing the streets, but not the weight of what he now carried. The trunk in his hands was no longer just an object. It had become a symbol, a ledger of the hidden, a record of lives stolen and silenced. Every photograph, every tape, every document contained fragments of a truth that had been buried for years, waiting for someone with courage enough to uncover it. He had taken the first step, but the path ahead remained treacherous. Those who had orchestrated the disappearances, those who had hidden behind walls of bureaucracy, secrecy, and fear, were still out there, watching, waiting. The city's lights flickered against the wet asphalt, oblivious to the storm of secrets moving beneath them. As Daniel moved through the streets, he realized the enormity of what he now carried. Exposing the truth would not be simple. It would demand resolve, ingenuity, and the strength to face threats he had not yet imagined. And yet, he felt a quiet certainty, a moral clarity he could not ignore. Some stories were too important to leave buried, some voices too long silenced. The missing had waited too long for justice. Families had waited decades for answers. And now, in his hands, the first piece of that reckoning had arrived. Every step he took echoed for them, for the ones who could no longer speak. Daniel paused at the corner of the street, glancing back once at the shadows he had left behind. Somewhere in the night, eyes followed, unseen, calculating. But he no longer hesitated. The story demanded to be told, and he would not allow it to remain hidden. Some truths are buried in the ordinary. Some crimes hide behind quiet streets and closed doors. But when someone dares to uncover them, when the courage to confront the hidden meets the persistence to reveal it, the world changes forever. And so, Daniel's journey began. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for the lives that had been stolen, for the voices that had been silenced, for the shadows that would no longer hold their secrets. This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.